Almonty Industries produces tungsten from its mine in Portugal and is developing two additional tungsten mines, one in Spain and one in South Korea. Tungsten is deemed a critical metal with production dominated by China and world governments requiring non-Chinese tungsten supplies in the coming years. CEO Lewis Black is providing an overview of Almonty's existing and planned tungsten production and how it fits in with world supply and demand dynamics along with its geopolitics. It's Tuesday, March the 11th. I'm Martin Gagel with Market Radius Research. Radius Research provides access to some of the best small cap companies available through insightful CEO interviews. But please remember, this is neither a recommendation nor investment advice. We're here to learn about the company. Lewis, thank you very much for taking the time to join us here. We appreciate it. Tell us how things are going and please tell us what's going on with Almonty.
Hi, Martin. Thanks for having me. And hello, everybody. I'm sure some of the people who are watching have attended previous forums, so welcome back. I hope to keep everybody well informed, despite an unusual market for everybody right now. But look, eye on the prize, eye on the prize. That's what we've got to remember. So my name is Lewis Black. I am the founder, president, and CEO of Almonty. And for our sins, we are the last man standing in tungsten outside of China, Russia, and North Korea. We have been in this current iteration for around 13, 14 years. We've been around in this longer than anybody else currently in the market. And we have one of our projects has been running uninterrupted for 136 years. So I think we can say without fear of criticism that we are in fact considered to be the market leaders outside of China. Now, to give you an idea of the company, of course, stock price right now, I adjusted it. We're like everybody else, a little up and down. But you know, as they say, you always sell the winners first because we've performed very, very well in the last 3 months. And so, of course, it's normal that we see a little bit of a retrenchment. But to be honest, I'm not unduly worried. I am still the second largest shareholder. I've deployed somewhere in the region of $13 million of my own money into this. I am first and foremost shareholder. And as long as you don't see panic in my eyes, you know everything is fine. We currently are under construction, and you can see under our long-term debt, everything in our debt structure is either a project finance loan from KfW or it's essentially friendly debt. So we don't have anything that's horrifically threatening. Our volume, our liquidity is in the top percentile in Toronto on the TSX full listing in junior miners. We average somewhere in the region of 10 to 12 times any other tungsten project that's listed globally, internationally, as well as the fact that we have a market cap somewhere in the region of 6 times greater than any other project that's listed in the West. Our board of directors we've been together for a long time, and I think we have a good dose of lawyers to make sure I stay out of trouble, which is very important. We have good support in Australia, and I think generally our low turnover of both directors, senior officers, and mid-management is testament to what the people within Almonty perceive as our future. So, as Martin very eloquently puts, we currently produce from our Portuguese mines, 136 years old. She's an old girl. She's not cheap, but we are quite unique. We are the only tungsten project that receives a premium for our material, not because it's from Portugal, but because the quality of this product is very high. And as such, its desirability, there's a lot of suitors for that material. She has, in the current iteration, probably close to 20 odd years left, and we're looking now to develop level 4 to give it another 40% increase in our output and an extension of maybe 30 or 40 years. Sangdong, South Korean project, is the world's largest tungsten mine. It has a grade running 3 to 3.5 times the average. It was in operation for 40 years. It was the backbone of the Korean economy through the 50s and 60s, accounting for some 30% of GDP. And multiple of the large corporations in Korea, like POSCO, like Tagutech, like Pusan, they were all created by this mine. So this mine has a legendary status. Valtreixal is another project in Spain. It's still missing the one permit, which is the full environmental permit. That's really because the current government for the last 7 years in Spain hasn't issued an environmental permit. So we wait. But the idea is, and I think it's a good idea as an operator, is our mine in Los Santos, which performed extremely well, was highly profitable. That plant will be relocated to Valtreixal once that final permit's in place. And I would just like to add one point before I leave this page. Panasqueira makes money every single month. Every week it makes money. And given its grade and given its age and size, it's testament to our skill. And I always say to everybody, imagine a situation where when we have Portugal at this grade and this size, what we can do with Korea, which is the same underground mine, which has a grade some 3 times, 2.5 times greater than Portugal. So that gives you a very high level of what we expect the future to hold. So tungsten, well, we've known the sensitivity of tungsten. We've also known the amount of markets that essentially the end markets for tungsten covers everything. I mean, it's quite unique in that regard. If you look at the critical metals, there's nothing else that's deployed in more sectors. But there's always been a kind of tungsten diplomacy. Essentially, we've known the sensitivities of tungsten and the fragility of tungsten, but there's always been an unwritten rule amongst governments and companies that they wouldn't really engage in what we call poor tungsten diplomacy. That was until last year. And last year, out of the blue, we saw the Biden administration place tariffs on a tungsten sector that doesn't exist in the US, which was extraordinary. And that seemed to have opened the door for finally China, it appears, to weaponize its dominance in this. And I think it's very important to know that North Korea, China, and Russia are the 3 primary sources of tungsten, about 90%. But because of the Ukraine war, all the Russian material now flows through China. And of course, the North Korean material has always flown through China. So China, by de facto, has ultimately total control of this sector. But we have certain hurdles coming our way. One of them is the US Department of Defense. I think it's important to know that the DoD has set this benchmark where from 2027, January 1, you can't use tungsten that comes from Iran, North Korea, China, or Russia, which of course means that it's pretty much us, which is an extraordinary scenario. And we're going to talk about artisanals in a little bit because someone could say, oh, but what about artisanal miners? Well, we're going to address that in a second. Obviously, from February 4th, the official export ban came in. Well, it wasn't an export ban. It was a change of regulation in China that requires an export permit to move tungsten out of country. And there was this regulation says you cannot provide it for dual use, anyone that's perceived to be with the military. Now, it was quite a creative way that they did it because initially China said, well, you do the same in the EU, you do the same in the States. It's not exactly true. What happens in the EU and in the States is that there is a dual use regulation that's applied to a very small, finite part of the sector. Because going back to what I said before about how widely tungsten is used, if you make it too broad a band, you essentially invalidate everybody. Because, for instance, I don't know, if someone is manufacturing a brake part, a braking system for a vehicle, you could legitimately claim that that braking part could end up in an armored vehicle, so you can be invalidated. Now, China is not invalidating anybody at this time, but like antimony, that we saw that export restriction come in October of last year, it's going to take months to even process these permits, and it's given China this ultimate tool that they can now decide using our own rules against us in terms of saying, well, it's dual use. Now, of course, there's also, the REE Shore Act, which, of course, reinforces what the DoD is doing. NATO have named tungsten as a critical metal. Well, given its relevance in defense and munitions and armor, it's fairly important. And Everyone depends, China, North Korea, and Russia. It doesn't matter how we sell it, how we present it. It's an inescapable fact that 90% of the raw material contained within your munitions or your armor plating, and that's, we're not talking about all the other, economic growth engines. We're just talking about defense, relies on those three countries, which of course creates this rather unfortunate catch-22 where you're sending munitions to Ukraine to defend themselves against the three countries that have provided 90% of the raw materials for the tools you've sent to Ukraine. So it's a very difficult situation. So in terms of tungsten price, it's remained stubbornly high when other commodities have been the victim of say, for instance, Chinese oversupply. We're talking lithium, we're talking rare earths. They've seen big price declines. We've stayed, in the higher percentile of what we've seen historically. But of course, what's happened in the last 2 weeks is that it's starting to adopt the trajectory of antimony, and it's starting to increase quite dramatically. I think it's important to try and understand how China is going to defend its market share. We've seen in lithium and rare earths, as just two examples recently, is that the ability to supply more material than the market requires in fact creates an oversupply, and that of course controls price. And that's the way China has classically controlled market share. But tungsten is a little different. There's a couple of reasons for that. One, China's closing mines, not opening them in China, because they removed the subsidies. They became very expensive mines to keep supporting, and they removed those.
Louis?
Yes.
Sorry, question. Is tungsten typically produced out of a tungsten mine, or is it more of a byproduct of other things? Your mines seem to be very tungsten focused,
tungsten mines,
but
tungsten mine, very, very rarely do you find it's a byproduct. You often find, the one exception is Sino-Moly in China, which is the world's largest moly mine that also produces, also by default, the world's largest tungsten mine because it has that as a byproduct. But you could look at that as a tungsten mine with moly as a byproduct. They just chose to look at it as moly with a tungsten byproduct because, of course, moly is tradable on the LME and is a hedgeable commodity. So, but it's normally always found as a standalone deposit, not as a byproduct.
All right, thank you.
So I think when I was saying they're closing mines with the removal of the subsidies, they essentially have got themselves into a situation where it's more expensive to buy tungsten now in China than it is in the West. And what they've started to do is, since last year, is procure far more Western concentrate for import. They're a net importer now. And this says to me there's a different strategy coming. And I wasn't sure, but when I saw the outline for the CCP Congress for this month, it's happening in this month, where they're going to debate the removal of an environmental regulatory code, which has restricted the ability of Chinese companies to import, process, and consume scrap. That says to me that it appears that China's strategy in regard to the tungsten market is starvation of our customers rather than the destruction of price. Which, of course, to me, after all the work that we went through to get a hard floor for our contracts, was kind of, rather like, oh, because we have a hard floor. So if they collapse the price, we're not going to be the victim of what's happened in lithium and what's happened in rare earths. But I believe China's approach is going to be a process of starvation to the Western consumers to protect the Chinese market share. Moly price, again, is very much, again, secured with a floor price. We've made a deal with the world's second largest moly oxide smelter. This material is going to end up in the States through a plant they're building in Texas, which is for SpaceX and for the US missile defense sector. But again, I'm a big believer that floor prices are absolutely essential for strategic metals, absolutely key. And they've got to be with real companies. It can't be just with some guy you meet down the pub. It must be with a AAA rated, corporation. It must be something with some real standing. And it's also important that you have no cap on the upside, because if things go well, which you hope they will in commodities, we have cycles and we want to capture the up cycles and protect ourselves from the down cycles. You want to be able to maximize your return. And I think our selection of offtake partners has been very specific. And I think this is what all strategic metal miners have to do going forward. This is an old picture. I apologize to anyone who saw this before, because I haven't updated it. I haven't had a chance. We are further advanced as the site begins to morph into it, and we're still expecting to open in 2 to 3 months and finish all the commissioning. So let's, walking to the finish line. The good news is snow is gone, weather is good, and people are happy. And that's the most important part. We've just had a visit from KfW and Hatch. They were there for the whole week, and they left happy. And that's the benchmark. For me as a shareholder, if the banker is happy, then that means I should be happy. So what makes the difference to Almonty? Well, we are re-domiciling to the US. That was recently approved at the shareholder meeting, special shareholder meeting. We'll be the only US company who produces tungsten. We only mine in democracies. That's a decision we made many years ago. Our customers like the transparency. We like the peace and quiet, even though from a regulatory point of view, it's not for the faint-hearted. It's a full-time job. I think we have a track record that is unsurpassed, unmatched by any other group that exists outside of China. And I will say that at the risk of litigation, nobody has been doing this as long as we have made as much money as we have, and quite frankly, have the real duration of reserves that we have. Because unfortunately, sometimes reserves are quoted as a tonnage rather than as an economically viable tonnage. It's a big difference. As I said, we are first and foremost tungsten operators. That's it. And I think that the Moly mine was a very good example of the planning. It was permitted fully, environmental permit, everything, at the same time as the tungsten, because we always knew our growth would be generated internally. So we would just finish the tungsten, finish phase 1, move into phase 2, and then start to also migrate into building up the Moly. Our management, we got a lot of years under our belt doing tungsten, a lot of years. Can I say, I'm not getting any younger, but I'm still feeling good. And that's the most important. And I'm doing this because I can see I've made a lot of money in the past. We called it before. We're doing it again, but we're doing it at a much larger scale with Korea. We have something that's unique, nobody else has, and it's highly desirable to numerous suitors because of its ability to allow full diversification from Chinese supply, as well as the fact that you have longevity and that it can also be expanded even further. And I think one point that's often overlooked, we don't make decisions for headlines. We make decisions for value. That's because I'm a shareholder. Now, that's very important to remember. I'm not what you would classify as a typical manager. I'm a shareholder first and foremost. What's good for me is good for all of my shareholders. And it's good for the company. It means we're lean, we're careful, we don't make stupid, we try and make stupid decisions. And if we do make a stupid decision, we pivot. We don't keep making the same decision. So this is also important. And I think, to finalize on this page, even our financing, we are the first and only tungsten mine to have been able to attract a tier 1 project finance lender for 80% of project cost. KfW Apex Bank had never done a tungsten project, and they'll probably never do another one. And so I think that is testament to what the investing community also view us as. that we have attracted the tier one groups of this. We've avoided hedge funds, PE funds. We've done this independently, and even our liquidity. We've done this without the support of a bank. And I think this is very important. Unless people argue the market is wrong and KfW are idiots and our shareholders are just basically drunk, you can't possibly say that all of these different groups have got it wrong. They must all share the same belief that I have. So going forward, well, great for us, not so great for everybody else in terms of what the future holds, how China is going to behave. But for our near-term growth, and this is important, what are we going to do? We're going to re-domicile first and foremost. We're going to open phase one in 2 to 3 months. That's 50% of our design capacity output, which is all going to be shipped to start with to Pennsylvania, to the largest penetrator manufacturer in the US. And that's what we call phase one. Phase two is already highly advanced because we've done a lot of the work during phase one. And phase two will open roughly within 12 months of commissioning phase one. And that's a doubling up of our output and revenue. During this year, we hope to significantly advance the moly through looking for the debt funding in Korea, through the development bank. And we also then are looking to work on the downstream tungsten oxide with the Korean government. But I think the way to look at this in a purely high-level economic view is that phase one is revenue of X, phase two is 2X, and the moly mine is 4X. And if we then pursue all the way down to downstream for the tungsten, you're then at roughly 5.5 times X. And all of that increase in revenue is generated internally. We're not having to go out and look for accretive growth through acquisition, because right now prices are completely, very, very aggressive, the pricing. So I don't believe we can get as good a value in our growth externally compared to what we can do internally. Sangdong, for anyone who it's huge, it's vast. My grandchildren, not that I have any, but one day I will have, I hope, they'll be mining this. This is a resource that's quite extraordinary. So Martin, I'm a little bit over our agreed schedule. I do apologize. I'm sorry about the interruption earlier. Occasionally you have to take a blowtorch to somebody who's disturbing an event like this, but now I'm all yours.
Excellent. All right. Thanks. I'm fairly new to the Almonty story. You did a high-level overview. Could you just dig into a little bit on the South Korean project, like what the timing is on phase one, what I guess what you're close to commissioning, when do you expect production to be out of there? And do you have any sort of initial, you say you're going to, phase two will double phase one. Do you have any initial forecasts or outlook on what phase one production would look like?
Well, phase one I think it's all public. And so phase one will produce roughly 2,500 tons of concentrates. To put that into perspective, the entire world, depending on which Chinese numbers you use, is somewhere between 84 and 93,000 tons a year. That's global output. So the first phase is and to put it into the US perspective, the US consumes somewhere in the region of 9,300 tons a year of concentrates, equivalent. So,
and you're saying 2,500?
2,500 in phase one.
Okay.
And phase two will be another 2,500, because phase one is passing 645,000 tons a year of ROM, and then we increase that to 1.2 million tons in the second, in that 12 months after the commissioning. The commissioning of phase one will occur sometime in 2 to 3 months, somewhere in that ballpark. It's, as I said, Metso is on site now. Final assemblies are underway. Test work, the soft commissioning. It's, I think you never want to give a hard date, because in mining, you always jinx things. But we're in the ballpark of when we estimated. And we would expect to see physical production, generation of revenue. I would prefer to say conservatively Q4 of this year.
Okay.
But it's important to remember that this is a flotation plant and not a gravity plant. And for those of you that care about things like this, a gravity plant I love because there's an art to balancing it. But in terms of ramp up, if I look in Portugal, which has the highest recoveries in the world for a tungsten project using gravity, it took 40 years to perfectly balance that line. So it takes a long time. Whereas flotation is a chemical process, and therefore it's far more predictable in terms of ramp up, because you are literally just passing a size fraction into a series of cells. And that makes a big difference. And this will be the first project done with flotation in tungsten since, I believe, the early 70s. And funnily enough, there are only really two mines that have survived the Chinese cull in the 80s. One is the Portuguese mine, and the other one was the mine in Austria, which uses flotation. So flotation has always managed to find an economic way to get through the hard times as well as the good times. So, and this project in Korea was always flotation anyway. So I didn't want to reinvent the wheel. The fact that I can also automate it, which of course is hugely advantageous in a non-mining jurisdiction like Korea, but it worked before. Why would we think to try and feel that we could do it better than what was at one point one of the most important, if not the most important company in Korea? So I hope that answers the question, Mark.
All right. Okay, that's great. And then on Portugal, you talked about there being a 20-year life of the current, I guess, mine plan or resource estimate, but there is extension to that. From what you said, could you talk about the expansion potential there?
Yes, I mean, we work. I mean, this mine is going 136 years, so each level gives you about 50 years. So we have level 0, level 1, level 2, and we're currently working level 3. And so we've got about 20 years left in that, but we would like to open level 4. We weren't going to look at it for 10 years, but the indication from customers in Europe is to look to bring that forward. And so we're exploring a partnership or relationship with the EU to help fund it, because that's important. We may also look in the US for similar funding, because my focus right now internally for the growth is Korea. And so I want to deploy what capital I have into that. If a government is willing to support it, then we will open level 4 earlier than was originally contemplated. And, I think the EU, I think the EU is probably the most likely home, because with their recently announced increase in defense spending, as they look to become more independent from the US, but not from NATO, of course, there'll be a lot more pressure to find tungsten that is in their backyard. And given that there's really no appetite for new mines in Europe, having an existing mine which doesn't require additional permits or doesn't have any impact on surface for whatever the expansion is going to be taken, there's certain advantages. And so I think we're talking, with the EU. It takes time, but let's see how that goes. But yes, that's my plan with Portugal.
All right. Since we've hit those two countries, the Spanish mine, can you just give us a recap on the plans, how you see that working out?
Oh, it's going to sit there until, unfortunately, the current administration in Spain that's been in place now for 7 years has meant that there hasn't been one environmental permit issued to a metal mine in 7 years to anybody. It's
Okay.
just I mean, one doesn't like to allude to it being a deliberate, ploy, but not one. I mean, you have to look. The Iberian Peninsula, Spain and Portugal were traditionally the mining hubs of Europe, but there are only 3 metal mines in Portugal. In the last 10 years, there was 3 10 years ago in Portugal, and there's still 3. In Spain, I think there were 10 years ago, and now there are 8. So you can see that there's no real impetus to develop any new mines in that peninsula. And I think until there is a change of heart or change of direction, Valtreixal, our Spanish project, it's ready to go, but without that permit, you can't proceed. Then it's not that there's any environmental problems. All the right studies have been done. Everything's been analyzed with proper operators. We're not in, a difficult region in which to work. It's just, not possible for the last 7 years to get an environmental permit in Spain for any metal mine.
The Korean mine, your mine in Portugal is generating cash. Your Korean one, I believe, will soon be generating cash. You'll have excess cash. Is that going to be largely put into then growth and expanding new opportunities, or are there any, or what are some uses you would like, or the priority you would think of uses of excess cash? Expansion, return to shareholders through share buybacks or dividend plan, or is it mostly growth that you see in Almonty's future?
All in the initial in the short term, everything will be redeployed into rapid internal growth. The
Okay.
more that I can grow this internally, the higher the valuation that we will continue to achieve. And on that basis, the more desirable the company becomes to others, as it were.
Yes.
So we're not doing this for a pension. We're doing this for an exit. We have the
Okay.
best. We financed it with the best. We've been I mean, think about this. We're a junior mining company that still has our first set of shareholders from our original IPO, and they are all in the money. I mean, even though this sounds absurd to say out loud, normally at this point of the game, you've burned through 3 or 4 sets of shareholders and everyone's still underwater. So the fact that we have the original guys from back at the IPO when we first bought the Los Santos project, and they're all in the green, is in itself extraordinary. It's been very, very careful to walk to the finish line, because when we sold the Portuguese project before, we sold it for 21 times earnings, which basically set the benchmark for valuation for tungsten projects. And I think we had to be very careful with Korea, because Korea is supersized. Portugal is a great project, lovely part of the world, consistent performer, but in the scheme of things, it's producing 1,000 tons a year. And that's all, and it's very high grade and it's very desirable, and we get this premium, and it's all wonderful. But Korea put us into a whole different, bullpen to play in, because now we have something that can truly give diversification to a nation almost. I mean, we had to do it properly, because nobody wants to buy a junior mining company that has, crazy expensive debts, weird and wonderful management, data you can't really trust. It's just too much hair on the dog. The kind of people that we want to appear desirable to have very, very high standards. And the only way you achieve those standards is right from the beginning of the journey. You have to make sure your shoes are clean for the entire walk. You can't just rub them on the back of your pants as you come to the finish line. That doesn't work at all. So that's what we try to do. And that's how, as a shareholder, I've looked at this. Has that made me, the target of all kinds of weird and wonderful abuse? Absolutely. Because everything we've done, we shouldn't have been able to do. We should not have been able to get the liquidity we got without a support of a bank. We shouldn't have been able to finance this as we did with a tier one lender, because we're a small company. We shouldn't have been able to do this without the assistance of PE funds, hedge funds, but we did it all. And we did so whilst maintaining the value to our original shareholders. We didn't burn anybody. And I think it's really important, Martin. This is so important to me, that we do this properly, because the day that which came to me in Portugal when we sold that, it's really important to be presented in the best possible light. And the only way you're going to get the right kind of person to love you is if you have something that is absolutely lovable. That's it.
All right. We've better get on to audience questions here. I appreciate everyone's patience. What security do you have at the mine in Korea?
Well, I'm not really sure what it means. You mean, do I have a fence around the site?
I'm not sure. I thought that was you, that some context. We've got a lot of questions to go
No, no.
through,
I mean,
so
we have it's a mine. We obviously have
yeah.
it secured. Do we have guys roving with German shepherds and searchlights? No, no. We have cameras, and I mean, we operate at the highest levels of ESG with equator principles. So health and safety is right at the top of everything. No, everything is, it's a 24-hour monitored site, even under construction. There's nothing, and the village itself is very much involved in what we're doing. And so, it's like the old Wild West. If a stranger comes to town, we know about it. So it's no,
Yeah.
we're a highly securitized site.
Is the region supportive of the mine, or is there like sometimes mines get community backlash? What is the general local feeling of it?
You can't build in a democracy without absolute support from the local community. It's just not possible. It's
Yeah.
it's 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 I mean, and that doesn't mean, this absurd thing that, oh, it must be jobs and money. Give the money and job. It's far more than this, because
Yeah.
it's a future for an area we're in, which was developed for this mine in the first place. They went from 40,000 people living in this town to 1,200. So it's completely like been annihilated. And so what we've done by coming back in, and there's obviously a couple of owners before us who talked a good game, didn't deliver. So they were a bit jaded to start with, everybody. But we're essentially reinvigorating the entire region from our presence. And integration with the community is extremely important. You can't be in a mine without having those relations. And I wouldn't want to be. I don't want to be in a region where people are outside, locals. I'm not talking about NGOs who just get upset about everything, but I'm talking about local people. You have to leave it better than you found it. And that's how you have to approach mining in the 21st century.
Right. Have tariffs affected Almonty, or I guess tungsten?
Um, no, they have not. They've made the markets a bit all over the place. So our share price is on for a bit of a rough, a bit of a rocky road, up and down, as everyone has been. And I don't think we're only just into tariffs. I think one of the things we saw was an export ban from China on tungsten, and they haven't shipped any tungsten now for nearly a month. And if it's like antimony, they probably won't be shipping for some months to come. So I suppose the impact of tariffs is higher tungsten prices, our valuation shooting up through the roof, and suddenly I've got a whole new set of friends who I've never spoken to before in my life, who are actually my customers, the actual physical assemblers of defense items or semiconductors or raw parts for automotive or aerospace, and everybody wants to talk. So I think that's what I've really seen from tariffs.
All right. I believe Mactung is being brought back online. What effect will this have on the tungsten market?
Well, Mactung is some way away. I mean, I know the project well. I remember it when it was joined to Cantung, which was a high grade property in the Yukon. It was about 100 odd miles south of Mactung. But it always struggled with very high fixed costs, fly in, fly out. It was great guys, fantastic operators, fantastic. They're really the best of the best. I mean, I was blown away how those guys operated. I think we bought Korea in 2015. We are opening now in 2025. The benchmark for opening in a democracy is 8 to 10 years. I think that Mactung has no infrastructure. I think it's a couple of 100 kilometers from the nearest road. Um, it's remote. It's deep into the Yukon. But even if we say that tomorrow it's green light and it's a go, you're looking 8 to 10 years away. And in tungsten terms or in commodity terms, what makes you think I'm going to be speaking to any of you in 10 years? What makes you think I'm still going to be independent? Let's be perfectly honest. I mean, it's like the chances of me addressing you in 10 years' time as Almonty, talking about the Korean project and what impact can it have on the market? Um, you know, Artisanals make up the bulk of the non-Chinese supply currently. They're all scattered all over the place. A little bit here, a little bit there, all adds up. I don't believe it's going to have any impact in terms of pricing. I think it's just demand continues to increase every year, but it's a question for what's going to happen in 8 to 10 years, and who knows?
Yeah, 8 to 10 year potential production is not going to impact any near-term pricing. With your transition as being U.S. domiciled in that, can you give some sort of timeline on when things are expected to happen? And then there's a question here if you will maintain your TSX listing with that as well.
Well, let me start with TSX listing. I'm keeping the listing. My liquidity is good. There's no doubt my listing is staying. My redomiciling will occur during this year, unless just complete craziness, continues in the world. But to be honest, I imagine sometime after the summer is probably the time we're going to finally do it. But we've got the approval. I now have to measure the best way the most value add way to do it. We're looking at U.S. government conversations about, and that'll all become evidence shortly. So it's one of the multiple balls that I'm juggling. But be under no illusion, it's being done for a very specific purpose. It's not just because I don't like the food in Canada anymore. It's part of a broader plan, and
Yes.
bear with me. I think it's the best word for it. But thank you all to shareholders for approving it almost unanimously. So that shows that I'm not alone in thinking this is a good idea.
All right. Do you see yourself being in the driver's seat in 5 years from now?
As a company or as an individual?
Oh, that's how the question was. So why don't you
Okay.
answer it either way or
Well,
both ways?
as a company, we absolutely will be in the driving seat. Nobody has anything even close to what Sangdong is. It doesn't matter how you fluff it, competitor, it doesn't make any difference. It was always the big dog, even before we owned it. It was the one everyone coveted. It was the king of kings, the big capo. That was it. Top of world class, tier one. It was the king. The trick was, of course, making sure it was financed the right way and operated by people who actually have, well, operated tungsten mines. That was really the trick. In terms of me, I'm in this until either A, one of you out there who's, doesn't like me and wants to try and, follow me down a dark alley. But while Almonty exists, I will be here. I'm too big a shareholder to leave this to chance. I have a plan. I have a value add, concept of what the future holds. I want to make sure that's realized. And unfortunately, in life, sometimes if you want a job done, you got to do it yourself.
Do you have the skill set? Do you like to do the job properly, or do you think maybe a more experienced or seasoned or big mining senior executive would maybe do better for you as a shareholder?
I think that's a good question, but given that there's such a small field of people who've been involved in tungsten, and I think also my track record speaks for itself. I've successfully exited from this before. And I don't think I have virtually no turnover of staff. It's not that I'm paying them, incredibly well. I mean, I'm paying them so they all share in the upside with options, but we are a strong and united team. I've done this a long time in tungsten, close to 20 years now. So I don't think a bigger mining executive will have that kind of experience. But that's not to say that as Korea opens and the more not mundane, but the more sort of regular grind of being in the mining industry is then undertaken, you're in production, you're making earnings, that I won't look to expand the C-suite of the company, because I agree, in some ways, There's so much to do. Can I do it all? I'd like to, but there's not enough hours in the day. So I don't believe to date we've suffered because of that, but I certainly see a moment in the future where one, it's important to have an enlarged C-suite within reason. I'm not going to go crazy. They're expensive. And secondly, because you know, as this company matures and therefore becomes into play for its desirability, I want to ensure that I can focus on my mission entirely, and sometimes the day-to-day stuff takes away from that. So, I'm not one of these people that have, well, yes, I have control issues, but I also recognize that value is more important to me. So if I feel that it adds to the company, I will definitely do it. And I am going to start looking as this mine opens.
I would think, given how you're growing, like a role like a COO, a chief operating officer, or something like that would maybe be a
Yeah, no, I
suitable
mean,
fit.
I think it's important because I need to focus on getting the story out there. I need to focus on value, and I have to get the value up all the time. It's my job as the CEO, and our team is very proficient at mining tungsten. What they really need constantly, like all engineers and geologists, is strong discipline because they will spend every penny you'll ever make, all legitimately, but they do love to spend. So you need somebody who's constantly reinforcing and analyzing budgets, squeeze and squeeze and squeeze. And that's mining. That is the reality of mining. When you start buying planes and building offices, you know that you're not doing a good job in a mine because mines are cyclical. When it's good, you stash the money. When it's bad, you survive. And that's very important. Always approach mining for survival, even when things are good. Don't let things run away with you. So yes,
Yeah.
I don't, I am aware that I'm going to need, a CEO or some C-suite expansion to help me.
All right. We're running out of time here, so I'm going to try to squeeze in at least one more question, which I think is a good one. How is Almonty going to finance the moly mine? Would there be any more dilution coming?
Well, firstly, I'll do it the same way as I did with the tungsten. I'll get the debt first. So my
Yeah.
target is the debt. So I'll look for 80% of project cost, which is a traditional kind of format. And I will look within Korea, maybe at the Korean Development Bank, but there's a number of options that I have for the build of that. Once I have the debt, then let's see where the tungsten is doing. I'll address the equity at that point for the build out. But I mean, to be honest, you're talking about a similar project cost as the tungsten, and yet our share price is almost 4 times higher than it was when we built out, when we developed well, I mean, if we look in Australia, it's just over 2 times higher than we did our IPO at, which was the finance piece of the equity for the tungsten project. So it's a different dilutionary story, but you're looking at another $125 million in total, of which 75, 80, 90 million of that will be debt, for project finance debt. So let me get the debt first, then let's see. I'm also very sensitive to dilution. So I am one of those unusual managers and a junior where I am completely and utterly aligned with my shareholders. And in fact, as you brought up earlier about me needing to, maybe get some help, I'm not a big fan of management because, so that's me. Some of my issues and quirks, but I'm sensitive to it. Let me get the debt first, then let's see.
If it goes according to roughly to plan, what would be the timing of, let's say, the debt on the moly and the actual, when would you need the debt and when would that project really start moving forward?
I'd like to at least get the firm commitment for the debt during this year.
Okay.
And I would like to look at construction toward the end of next year, in the
Okay.
preparation. That this would be in an ideal world. But in mining, I mean, the good news is I'm fully permitted, but permits are just one part of the journey in a democracy. So if everything goes beautiful, we start quickly. But if I hit, I don't know, NGOs or I hit something, who knows? But certainly the consumer, the buyer of the material, the off-taker, he wants it by yesterday. So, and they're a very significant business in Korea. And so I think the two of us have a strong voice within Korea. And I think that's going to be very helpful for the development.
All right. I believe you have to get going here shortly, and we need to
Yep.
wrap this up. Any final comments, tie a bow on the presentation to final thoughts to leave participants with?
Well, I'd just like to say that if anyone's asking why aren't I buying stock in this price environment, it's because I'm in blackout, because the numbers are coming out soon, and the TSX says I can't look at this stock with the eye of buying. But believe me, if if I could, because I have the ability of seeing the future of what we're doing, and I'm still very happy and comfortable with where we are. I think we've really landed on our feet, and the geopolitics is doing us an enormous favor, which, as my father used to say, may he rest in peace, better to be lucky than smart. And I don't think there's anything truer in mining.
All right. And if you're lucky and smart, that's even better. Lewis, and I'm not saying that you are smart. I'm just saying if you are
That's all right, man.
the
I wasn't going
two.
to take that as a compliment anyway. It's
No,
okay.
please don't. Please don't. But you are lucky. So we'll give you that. Lewis, thanks a lot. That was a lot of fun. Great overview and Almonty and the future there. We appreciate it. I'd love to get you back in the future, get some updates as you make your progress. Thanks a lot. Have a great day.
Thanks, Martin. Thank you very much.
Cheers.